Hello UAL. I hope you've all survived this last year intact, physically and mentally. I think it's been difficult for everyone in many different ways. Anyway, I'm Paul Handley. I'm the production and technical director at the National Theatre, and I'm here to talk to you about theatre and environmental sustainability. I should say that I'm not always this dishevelled. Oh yeah, apparently I am. So you can't blame the pandemic for everything. The problem is this, human activity is tipping 51 billion tonnes of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every year, and we need to get that number to zero. Climate catastrophe, climate emergency, there are lots of terms bandied around. I probably don't need to go into it because the media is full of it, and I'm sure most of you are better informed probably than I am about the impacts of this climate emergency. It's quite an abstract term. I think sometimes it's easy to think what is, especially in the depths of winter in the UK, what's a couple of degrees of warming? But it is an existential threat to not just human life, but to all life. And so I think we have, all have a responsibility to look at what we're doing and how we contribute to those emissions. And I think theatre absolutely has a responsibility to look at its practice. The whole range of human activity, whether it's what we grow and eat, whether it's what we make and how we make it, none of it is going to get away without some revision or some really quite fundamental response to how it makes this problem worse. I think theatre traditionally has perhaps struggled with this idea a bit. It feels, certainly with the activity on stage, that the impacts are relatively negligible. In fact, going back to the then Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, he started an initiative which was part of a whole reduction of carbon across London plan. And there was a specific segment about greening theatres, and in the studies done at the time, the data was relatively poor, and the slice of the pie that represented productions on stage looked rather small compared to emissions associated with front of house, with air conditioning, with the lighting front of house, and of course with audience travel. The data is still not great. There needs to be much greater measuring of the impacts of productions themselves. But to me, I think it's obvious we are making significant impacts. And, well, I'll show you a couple of images. We produce a lot of stuff and we waste a lot of stuff. In a way, my job title, which is Production Technical Director at the National, could otherwise be known as Head of Stuff. And so therefore I feel a really significant responsibility in trying to deal with the impacts of that stuff. Ever since I filled a skip 30 years ago when I started doing this stuff, I felt an acute sense of the terrible waste of making shows. You know, we put on a show, it might last for 6 weeks, it might last for 6 months, but at the end of it, generally speaking, we throw most of the scenery away. And that is a problem in a climate emergency. The problem with theatre sometimes as well is we tend to think of ourselves as well-meaning, decent thinking liberals who spend our lives trying to tell stories about the human condition, and that actually that is our contribution to society. But I think in this particular moment, we're not absolved of a greater responsibility. Arguably, that's to do with the content of some of the work we make, but it has to be about our practice as well. We have to find ways of reducing our carbon impacts. And obviously, there have been lots of people thinking like this for a good number of years. And in fact, there's a history of some incredible individuals and organisations that have tried to push our industry along in the right direction, whether that's Julie's Bicycle or Eco Pledge, Staging Change, Mast in Manchester, which is an affiliate collection of arts organisations, has done some incredible work. Or whether it's the Scottish Federation of Theatres, there are lots of people who have been scratching away at this for a long time. But it has never achieved the wholesale shift in approach in the production process in a way that would force both commercial theatre and the larger subsidised sector to take a radical look at how they do things. Unquestionably, small theatre, where most of us working in this industry came from, has got lots of examples of how to be sustainable. That sustainability to some extent is driven by lack of resource and lack of budget, lack of money, and some incredible things are achieved from stuff that's found. Certainly at the beginning of my career, I spent most weekends pulling stuff out of skips to be made into scenery in some small pub theatre or other. But now's the time to scale all of this up and do something really significant. So to get to the main subject of what I'm talking to you about, and it's a thing called the Green Book, which at the time of recording this is in its second draft. Well, a Green Book sets out to lay a standard and a roadmap for theatre to become sustainable. Nothing short of that. It's really ambitious, and it hopes to build on everything that the organisations that I've mentioned before and others, SIPA, Sustainability and Production Alliance, I forgot to mention earlier, have done some really great work. But it hopes to build on all that work and provide a standard that can be adopted by every theatre in the UK. The Green Book has been written, put together by Bira Happold, engineering consultants who serve the architectural and building industry and have advised on environmental sustainability in the construction industry around the world for many years. The driving force behind the book is an architect, Paddy Dillon, who's had a long association with the theatre, designing some of their spaces, but it's only in this period that he's taken a really deep dive into exactly how we make theatre. And the consultancy he's done, of course, isn't comprehensive, but it's very nearly the largest yet. And he's spoken to many directors, set designers, costume designers, lighting designers, sound designers, supervisors and technicians, set builders, to really get a sense of what people are doing currently to achieve their sustainable ambitions, but more importantly, to lay out a robust roadmap and to set a standard that we can all aspire to achieve. The guideline spells out pretty clearly, to my mind, that you do not have to be a sustainability expert to get into this, to do what we really have to do. In many ways, it's very simple, certainly outwardly. Do more with less. Use more reused components and recycle materials. If it has to be new, think where it comes from. Reduce harmful chemicals. Reduce travel, reduce deliveries. make sure everything gets used again. It sets up 3 standards to aspire to: basic, intermediate and advanced. And at the crux of those standards is really the insistence that we start reducing our single-use items and materials. At the end of the guide, the book, is a toolkit broken up into as many areas as seems sensible at the moment. It's not exhaustive, but it helps to point every department towards their next steps, with either reference materials, examples of people who are doing it well now, or just with the key principles that we need to apply as we go forward. I'm sure this book will require a revision every year as we get into this. There is still so much that is unknown about how we tackle this, but there are plenty of good examples around, and it doesn't really take much looking on Google to understand what the issues are, what materials are good, what materials are bad, and the fact that we just have to start doing things with less. It might look simple, but it clearly isn't. There are many challenges to the industry adopting these standards and embracing the Green Book as it needs to. There's been fantastic feedback so far. Designer collectives like Scene Change and the SBTD have looked at it and given their blessing. But of course there are some significant challenges, especially when we start looking at the advanced standard. It's a threat to some to the freedom of creativity. Up until now, the things that have restricted us have really been about time and money. But they are restrictions, and we have made some fantastic work at every scale with those restrictions. This essentially is a new paradigm that we have to operate in, a new set of restrictions. I think that we will have to significantly look at the current production process, which in many producing organisations really starts with the white card model, which becomes a final model, which becomes a fully realised set and production a couple of months later on stage. Say a couple of months, I know in some venues it might well be a couple of weeks later or a month. But I think up until now we've certainly viewed those models as things, acts of creation that need to be delivered millimetre perfect on stage, using the skill of many craftspeople and using lorry loads of new materials from timber merchants, steel merchants, polystyrene merchants, suppliers from around the industry. I think we need to radically review that, and of course the Green Book points to that in some ways, with references to a green model being a fundamental part of the process, where actually you start to look at a model, whether it's physical or digital, as the book suggests we should start doing more of, but looking at it with a view not just to money and time, but with a view to environmental impact. It won't be easy to begin with. Materials are relatively cheap, labour is generally fairly expensive, relatively. But what we will need to do is just work closer and much more collaboratively. And what the Green Book really points towards is at an earlier date. We're going to need more time. And that is going to be challenging. The theatre economy is really based on the fact that there is no income until audience are sat in their seats. And in most theatres, certainly in commercial theatre, you try and get to that point, especially on plays and perhaps risky ventures, as quickly as you possibly can. What is going to happen is we're going to have to stretch out some of these processes. We will need time to consider more sustainable methods of construction. We will need time to deliberate how to deliver the creative ambition of any project, which of course will remain absolutely the critical thing if our industry is to survive, but how to do it in a way that isn't using endless amounts of single-use material. So I've talked about the challenge to the perceived freedom of creativity, talked about the challenge to the existing theatre economy. And of course the other challenge is that, as brilliant and detailed as the Green Book is, it's not an exact blueprint for how to achieve great work while being sustainable. This will only come through experiment, trial, error, and absolute collaboration. One thing I'm a bit nervous of in the near future is that it becomes a tool to judge others with. That one thing we've seen in this period is that the freelancers who haven't been paid and really have been left pretty high and dry by this industry and by the government. But there's been a split to some degree with the buildings and the buildings' experience of the pandemic. And also buildings going back with less staff because they've been forced to make redundancies, much smaller budgets. It's going to be really challenging. And what our sustainable initiatives mustn't do is lead to all sorts of unhealthy moralising or judgment. The creative process is a tough one. It's going to take a while to find the answers to how to make great pieces of theatre in a sustainable way, and a huge amount of patience on all sides. What the Green Book is really fantastic at doing is spelling out that no one is absolved. It's everyone in the process. Everyone has something to contribute. Everyone has a responsibility to think about how they conduct their particular role in the process. So the opportunities of adopting the Green Book, well, there's the obvious one, which is it will help us do our bit for the future of humanity. And I'm really not being glib when I say that, it's genuine. The scientists did their work many years ago, but what they struggled to do is find the means to communicate what they knew about the impacts of climate change and the impacts of greenhouse emissions on the future of humanity. They didn't understand how to communicate that fully to the wider population, to the public. And actually I remember probably about 12, 13 years ago, when Chris Rapley, who at that point was running the Science Museum but heavily involved with the Oxford Environmental Institute, came and spoke to a bunch of writers at the Royal Court Theatre, and what he said was the scientists had done their work, it was up to us, the storytellers, the culture, to convey to the public the urgency of what was going on and what we needed to do. And of course, in the interim, we've really been trying to think about how to do that. And there have been lots of plays about polar bears. And there have been some really good plays about climate change and its impact on humanity. But it's difficult to do through content alone. And of course, what we realise now is we will communicate to our audiences the importance of sustainable behaviours through everything that we do. And if the audience experience that and our values as soon as they step through the door, in fact, as soon as they buy a ticket online or over the phone, but then when they step through the door to sitting in the audience, to watching the theatre we've made, if we demonstrate in our practice that we are being sustainable, we would truly hope that they will take that home with them and perhaps look at their own contribution to this great crisis of ours. Something else that the Green Book points out is a more inclusive process. The pandemic has caused us all to reflect about our lives more, and Black Lives Matter has particularly caused us to reflect on how unrepresentative our industry is. A sustainable future is a more inclusive future. We need storytellers from all walks of life, from all communities. We need different ways of telling stories. We need different ways of making theatre. There's also great creative scope in revisiting all our current practice. There's potentially an aesthetic revolution in the middle of this. And as we move away from extravagance, it could lead to all sorts of innovation in the delivery of theatre and theatre design. So in conclusion, what we need to do is start imagining a better future. It's really important to remember that the Industrial Revolution and the resulting carbon economy is really only about a couple of 100 years old. Theatre has existed for much longer than that. It will out-survive the end of fossil fuels. But now is the time to act. The language around sustainable action has often been framed as reduction, going without, doing less of everything. And of course, to a large extent, that is true. But I think we have to imagine that we can still make really great human stories, and that we can still elevate those stories through design and the physical productions we put underneath them. Business as usual is not tenable. We all have to look at what we're doing, and we all have to support each other in getting to that point of zero emissions, whether it's in our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes. This problem isn't going away. Thank you.